and welcome to the Cardboard Herald podcast. I am Eric, joined as always by my lovely co-host Jack. I was trying to think of another adjective and I got lost there.
Yeah, I actually thought there was like some lag or something. I was like, did I drop off the call or what's happening? You know, is Eric
self-lagged
right at the moment? Yeah, I like it.
Well, my gut really wanted to go back to irreverent, but we've already used it, and then I couldn't think of a backup one. I don't know why. I don't think of these things when I start saying them, where I'm like, my lovely and other adjective co-host Jack. I don't usually think of them beforehand. It's just whatever feels right in that moment. And I was going to say irreverent again, which, you know, the audience already knows.
Yeah, that'd be a repeat. Yeah, I think you got to work on your adjective game there. But, you know, Christina and I call that vocal turbulence, where like your brain is operating at a different rate than your mouth is. Mm-hmm. And so you're doing a lot of lip flapping, and then either you conjoin words. There's actually a term for that where you like switch the beginning of one word with the next word and it just kind of like tumbles out. Mm-hmm. Or that kind of lag there. Just a weird sort of, you know, mechanical Android-esque glitch in the Matrix situation. Mm-hmm. Vocal turbulence.
Okay, yeah, we'll take that back then. And joined by my lovely tumbling co-host Jack.
Yeah, call me the tumbling dice. That's me. What's up, Eric?
Not much. I am back in DC. I just spent a lovely weekend at a friend of mine's wedding in Puerto Rico, which was gorgeous, and I got so sunburnt, which is why I'm fully covered at the moment, because I am peeling as all get out. I should have known. I sunburn at the slightest inconvenience of sun.
That's funny because you're originally from Florida, so totally. I would think that you're like prepped for that. You're just like biologically, you've been immersed in the sun, you're ready for that, and now you burn, huh?
Yeah, I used to not like I played tennis every day in high school for the most part. I was out in this Florida sun every single day and did not get sunburned. I did have like when I was a kid, I got sunburned a lot, but I moved out of Florida. I moved up north, and then my sunburn tendencies kicked back in. So, yeah, I am peeling as like I'm an orange or a banana.
Yeah, I was born in the tropics. I was born in the Philippines and then lived a few years in New Delhi, India, and once we moved to Alaska, I just adjusted because I am pasty and peeling when it comes to the sun. But did you bring any board games with you? Did you bring anything?
Yeah, I brought things. I brought Harmonies, just because it is my
amazing. At
this point, it is if my sister, my mom, and I are getting together, I'm bringing Harmonies. Like that's the point we're at. It's kind of been. I was not really anticipating them to latch onto it. Like, I kind of brought it because I was just like, oh, I like playing it. And my sister is roughly getting into board games. My mom isn't particularly, but she'll do whatever the family is, like, down to do. Like, she's down. My mom is down to, like, try any weird thing that just somebody said, this is fun. We're all going to do it. My mom will, like, she has done axe throwing, which is very out of character for my mom. But some friends of hers from work went and did it. And she's really happy about that.
Great. I love it.
Yep. So
the old tomahawk moots. So you went to Puerto Rico and you brought Harmonies with you. Did you get any other gaming in?
Not in Puerto Rico. I did play El Paso ended up on Board Game Arena today, so I gave that another play. That's the slimmed down version of Great Western Trail that Asmodee is putting out. It's solid. Yeah, it is a solid rendition of Great Western Trail. Because I
did you sell some Jersey cows? Like what happened in this? Did you Did you meet your objectives? Did you
No.
go around the trail many a time?
I did not play very well. No, the other person who I played against, I think like almost doubled the amount of points I got.
Yeah.
I'm not. I do not claim to be good at El Paso at the moment. But that was like for my first time playing. I was like, oh, this is cool. I'm getting how everything works here. Like it's a real snappy game. I'm really happy that I got to try that out.
Sweet.
Yeah, and then I've been playing more Witchcraft. I'm probably gonna throw a review together of it here shortly. Though I do have some other games that are arriving in the next week or so that are going to have a little bit of a timeline to review them. So that one I'll figure it out. But yeah, I think it'll be a positive review on Witchcraft. I'm liking it quite a bit. I think that I wish there was a little bit more variety, but overall super solid solo game, and it gets to the table so quick. I think that's kind of my favorite thing about it.
I wish that I could say the same for Super Squad High, which is a game that I've played recently, which has some really interesting ideas. It's by Nerdy Pup Games. I really enjoyed their first game, even though it was a little limited. That was Dungeon Date, which this as well has so much vibrance and so much personality. It's a cooperative worker placement, does some really cool things with the superhero genre, but it has this social element and like memory element to it that completely derails the flow of the strategic element of the game. And even apart from that, the worker placement and like the things that you're reacting to, unlike say, I don't know, anything from Spirit Island to Pandemic, where you make smart decisions, but you kind of, when to take risks, when to not take risks. You see what the problems are, and you're making choices about which problems that you're actually going to be able to deal with, and the ones that you let slide. The latitude with which you can let anything slide in here is very little, and so it becomes overly prescriptive in like what you have to do, which is a bummer, because like if I'm playing a cooperative game, I want to make those cool creative decisions, and there are hints at those cool creative decisions that you could do, but in the couple of games that I've played so far, for me, it's just a little too limited, and in conjunction with that social system, it didn't fly for me. But I'll have a review to kind of elaborate some of that here soon. I played some SETI recently. Shout out to Steve, who you met before moving down. He's someone who's relatively new to the board game hobby, and coincidentally, our topic today is gateway games. But he took to heavy games right away. He wants the heavier the better. The first time that I met him was at a public game night, and the host of it introduced him to me as someone who might be interested in the type of games that he typically likes. And he's like, yeah, when I'm at these places, I'm happy to play these things, but for me, the heavier the better. I'm not necessarily good at them, but I'm always interested in the systems, which I found really fascinating, because he's only been playing for like 2 years or so. He's new to the hobby compared to certainly you and I. And so the other night he was like, hey, on Tuesday, you want to play SETI? I was like, do you want to play SETI? Like that's a big chonker for a Tuesday night. And he's like, yeah. I was like, sweet. I just love that there's someone who's enthusiastic about getting a beast like that to the table, even if SETI was a game that I was not fully positive on. and some of the things, the issues that I have with it being kind of, that's the opposite spectrum of something like Super Squad High, where you have so much you can do, and it's hard to really tell if what you're doing is meaningful in the grand scheme of things. But I still had fun. I had fun
Great.
playing with him. So that was kind of a notable play. And the other thing that I didn't mention the other day, last time we recorded, but I started playing Sleeping Gods. Have you played Sleeping Gods?
I have not. I roughly know about it. I mean, I've seen the box art, and I think from everything I can tell, the game looks gorgeous. But I have not dived into that system. I think that's a game that I keep an eye on whenever I'm like looking at sales, because I'm like, I think for me that's the biggest barrier to entry, is just I know that it is in my mind a pricier game that I just I'll keep an eye on a sale, and if something comes up, I wouldn't mind having it. It seems like a fun game that would be up my alley, but I'm not like dying to go get it. But I'm happy to hear your thoughts on it. What are your initial takes?
Well, this is Distant Skies, which is the sequel game. I played the original Sleeping Gods with my buddy Mike and my wife, who was the Frosthaven crew. And then he had Sleeping Gods. I think he kickstarted it. And then we got Frosthaven and played through that campaign. In the midst of that, Sleeping Gods Distant Skies was put on, I guess it wasn't Kickstarter, I think it was GameFound. But I ended up backing that because I was like, you know what? I want this game. I want to support this company. And I liked the first one, and this will be cool to do once we wrap up Frosthaven, not realizing that it was going to sit unplayed on my shelf for many months as we continued Frosthaven. But we finally did. Broke out Distant Skies. I like it better. It's what I loved about the first game, which is a really smart open world game that combines strategic elements of adventure gaming with the narrative elements of adventure gaming, which are often at odds with one another, and integrates it very well here to make just a compelling, expansive system with so many levers going on behind the scenes. The typical Red Raven Games artwork is unbelievable. Just lovely story beats, narrative. And the few things that I felt were kind of lame about the original Sleeping Gods, like the huge cast of characters that you had to manage, regardless of your player count, and the combat system were both overhauled here. You still have a mandatory 5 characters that you have to play. One always rotates. That's the kind of like protagonist, the leader of the group. And then there's 4 characters besides them. So if you're playing a 4-player game, everyone gets 1 character and then rotates the captain. In our case, we have 1 person playing 2, which is Mike, and then Christina and I have alternate duties. She's like the note taker, map maker type of person, and then I'm the setting up game boards and manipulating components and, always on hand. Mike is managing 1 bonus character. That works beautifully. But yeah, Earthborn Rangers and Sleeping Gods really have, to me, proven how open world games that have conclusions, but you can save at any point, that makes sense in a comparison to some sort of video game, but you can come back and have different experiences or retread some of the same ground, can really work in ways that I think Seventh Continent tried, and had a lot of promise on what that could be, but didn't fully execute on.
Would you recommend Sleeping Gods Distant Skies to like somebody who's new to the hobby?
You know, I would not, and for a few reasons. Because that's our topic today. As I spoiled earlier, but good transition there.
Thank
You're
you.
getting your transitions going.
Thank you. I'm working on it.
Yeah, so I think Sleeping Gods, Distant Skies, or the original, is a good example of something that, while my fundamental rule in gateway games is if you're transparent about what the game's going to be and you explain the intensity of the game, if it's something that really appeals to someone, even after that full transparent explanation, then sure, give it a try. But the reasons why I think this wouldn't necessarily be a good starting point is it is very systems heavy, which there are a lot of touchstones that people who have played board games for a while could see how those relate to other types of games that are out there. Mm-hmm. I think it would be very good as an introduction to tabletop games if someone came from the RPG field, still tabletop games, but wanted to go into board games specifically.
Yeah.
I think this could be a fantastic translation. If they had no interest in Euro games or, like typical strategy games, but they wanted to see how adventure could be consolidated into a box, then I think that the touchstones of RPGs would be familiar enough that this could be a good translation. But otherwise, I don't think it's necessarily the strategy that's a barrier in a lot of games. I think it's the interconnectivity of systems and the reliance on, like touchstones to build someone up. I don't know. What do you think? Do you throw someone in the deep end? Do you try to go for something small?
I think if I'm trying to get a person into the hobby, or if I'm just like trying to get a person who I've played some smaller games with before, but more like want to get them more into the hobby, I think you mentioned it as touchstones. I kind of think of it as like humans like patterns. And so if I introduce them with something small, I can then use that pattern later on to teach them something bigger. So like I don't know if I would necessarily go straight, and this is a lighter game that I think some people might consider a gateway game, but I don't know if I would go straight to Seven Wonders when Sushi Go is right there.
Yeah.
So I think for me, when I think of gateway games at this point, I think of these games that are either distillations of really frequently seen game mechanics. And honestly, I think a lot of game right games are great examples of this, because like Abandoned All Artichokes is a deck builder. And people then have that reference point or touchstone when I want to introduce them to another deck builder that's maybe a bit heavier. Or like, and this is Dominion, I think is also a great one for that, because Dominion is really like a pretty pure deck builder that you can then teach people other deck builders. And I think
Ur deck builder.
Yes.
The herald of them all.
The prophecy spoke of deck builders, and it said Dominion this year.
That is interesting about Game Right, because you're totally on the money with that. The Forbidden Island, Forbidden Desert are great introductions, particularly Forbidden Island, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, actually, that entire series, I feel like, is a really good learn the mechanics, get introduced to other mechanics that now interact with that, which is just how I feel like a lot of, in my mind, how I would introduce someone to board games in a vacuum is teach them games that are super fun but are primarily focused on one single mechanic, and then you can start adding in other mechanics into that. So like with something like Dominion or Abandoned Artichokes, those are deck builders. The goal of that is to build your deck. In Abandoned Artichokes, it's to destroy your deck. I'm still going to call it a deck builder for this exercise, but like going from something like that to then like Clank is a really easy segue where they're like, oh, I understand how deck building works, and I understand how adding cards to my deck improves my deck in some ways. It makes me specialize in some ways versus others. And now I also have to figure out if I have a character on the board and I need to move my way down. So I think that there's, in a vacuum, that is how I would like to get someone into board gaming, and that would kind of be the flow of the gateway that I would like. But it all kind of depends on the person. But that's roughly what, when I think of gateway games, it's games that are primarily focused on one mechanic for the most part.
This is an example of us kind of putting the cart before the horse. I think we should actually define gateway games, right? Because, you know, that's one of the points of gateway games is to like introduce people to the hobby. So like for those who aren't familiar with gateway games or the terminology, you know, we're talking about what is a game that presents itself in a way that is an introduction to this. And this is a common thing for gamers to discuss, primarily because our hobby, unless you're intending on predominantly being a solo gamer, is contingent upon us introducing more people to the hobby. And oftentimes that's someone that we really care about being interested in the hobby, you know, the spouse, family members, friends, whatever. You want to make a good impression. And so there are certain games that don't necessarily sell the best impression of the board gaming hobby, either because they're very dense or niche, or the themes aren't going to be appealing. And gateway games are the ones that are frequently used as kind of that ambassador to bring people in. Now, there is another connotation for gateway games that we're not using it as here. That's more of like a pejorative, you know, like people will sometimes be dismissive that these are not meaningful games. Kind of in the same way that people will sometimes talk about like app-based games for phones as like, well, there are video games and then there's, you know, mobile games, as if someone who plays these doesn't count as a real gamer. And that's, I don't think super prevalent within our hobby, but you see it in online spaces for sure. And by any means, we're not saying that, you know, these games are intended to be exclusively used by people who are unsophisticated or not as knowledgeable about this hobby. You know, these are games that make good introductions, but if that's as far as you want to go and you don't want to build beyond that, if your favorite game is Sushi Go or Dominion or Forbidden Island or whatever, that's great. I love playing a lot of those games too. Even if my happy zone is in a complexity level higher than that, I'm always down to play that stuff. And that's not us saying like we have graduated beyond this and we would never demean ourselves to play these. Also, there is a weird element to gateway games. So this is like third element. Is the term is like a cute way of saying, you know, this is what's going to get you hooked. But it is a comparison to like drugs and addiction, right? Like that's what we're saying with gateway.
Probably,
you know, because we grew up, us, you know, I guess I'm like elder millennial here. Grew up hearing about gateway drugs. And so gateway games I've always thought of as like, oh yeah, it's your gateway into the hobby that you're going to be spending all your money and time on, and you're going to be obsessing over these games and buying all kinds of things.
I'm seeing no conclusions from Google of the origin of the phrase like gateway something. But I think that's
etymology.
Yeah, I think that's also fair where it's in my mind, the way that I'm thinking of it is gateway as in this is your introduction to the hobby, and these are games that can just introduce you to the parts of the hobby that are fun and also the parts of the hobby you might not like. But I guess it is also like this is how you get hooked and start spending all your money. That is also true for me. Where those games did get me into the hobby, and I have spent a lot of my money on games.
So with modern games, I think the undisputed king of gateway games is Catan, right? That's the one that's broken through into the mainstream. I'm not saying it's the best for everyone to use, but obviously it has been used time and time again as something to introduce people to there's a whole world beyond the board games that you grew up playing that are not chess, that adults want to play, and you're going to have a great time with it. Whole clubs have been built around this. So, what do you think about the prevalence and success of Catan, and do you still think of that as a good gateway game, or do you reach to alternatives?
I mean, I think that it has such a massive prevalence as a gateway game. I mean, I consider that and Carcassonne as my two gateway games. Like, those are the two games that I played initially, like, no other board game experience. And a friend of mine was like, oh, do you guys want to play this game? And I was like, oh, sure, totally. Or by no other board game experience, I mean just like modern non-Monopoly games. And I think it does a reasonably good job. And honestly, at this point, it's because it's become such a cultural reference point for board games. Like, people are much more willing to try Catan than, like, if I said, oh, let's play Sushi Go. Some of them, people don't necessarily know what that is, whereas they can at least fathom, oh, Catan is a popular game. I know that is a game. Let's play the thing that I know about. So I think in terms of that, it's a solid gateway game. It'll get people to at least, I think, be willing to try it. I think it's not necessarily the best gateway game in terms of it is such a highly social game that it becomes, I think Catan frequently can create bad experiences.
Yeah.
I think that for me, that's the biggest thing of it. It is more, in my mind, it's more likely that I play a game of Catan and be frustrated at the end than like really enjoy it.
Right.
At the end of it. But during the middle, I probably am having fun moments.
I think that is probably the inner board game circles, the gateway game that is most frequently turned on, right? Like people who immerse themselves in this hobby, who love learning all kinds of new games. Catan is just one that people step away from and reflect on and go like, there's been a lot of progress in this hobby since this released in 1995. And I don't even own a copy anymore. I have Catan Jr. My kid likes playing that, but like beyond that, I don't have it. And I played it again for the first time in a long time during COVID in an online session that I did with some friends local here in Juneau, with our video cameras and everything set up. Had multiple boards. I had my board that was here, and they had their board there, and one other board. And I was like, man, I enjoy that I'm doing this activity with my friends, and I enjoy that they are getting a lot out of it. But I don't love a lot about this game. There's a lot that I would change if I were remaking this, but I also think there are some really key features that make it a really good hook for the hobby. Like first off, the theme is historical in the vaguest sort of way that it can kind of appeal to like the George R.R. Martin reading fantasy nerd who's like, I want to look at some people struggle to raise some crops in the in some vaguely European land. But it's also not fantasy in a way that it isn't going to make someone feel silly when they're playing. And there are a lot of people who are new to this hobby, especially adults, who don't want to look silly. Like that is their biggest fear in playing a higher pressure strategic game. Adults have been conditioned that it is bad to look silly in front of other adults. And that's a problem as a society that we need to overcome. But having a indistinct but suitable theme that works generically for most people. And then the thing that you do in the game is you trade resources that pulls on some familiarity from Monopoly that a lot of people have as kids. It makes sense. You can understand this like agricultural bartering that's going on. And then you're building infrastructure. There are very few things that you can do on your turn. I can get my resources that turn into this, or this. And that's all I can do. The only text that I really have to contend with are on these development cards. And they are very simple, very straightforward. They do exactly what they do.
Yeah.
Probabilities, all that other stuff, that's strategy. But if I just focus on how do I get what I need to build a road, and then once I built a road, how do I get what I need to build a settlement? And can I upgrade that to a city? It's very good at directing someone at smaller objectives that end up expanding upon themselves, and you can very quickly see the ramifications of what you're doing. And you can very quickly see when something was a good or bad idea. Now, dice probabilities are going to mess everything up in Catan, but which I think I'm going back and forth on calling it Catan and Catan. You infected me with your Catan. But I think that those are the things when I was spending some time thinking about this topic that are the most key for gateway games to me. When I'm making introductions, it's not about having a few number of mechanics or systems. It's not about having a level of depth that's either super shallow or is super strategic. I think it's about having few but impactful decisions where you can quickly see what the consequences of your actions are. Where a game like SETI, and not only is it buck wild in the amount of things that you can do, but it's very difficult to see if what you're doing is a smart thing. A game like, say, Abyss by Bruno Catala, or many of Bruno Catala's games fit into this category. But Abyss or King Domino, you can see immediately what the impact of what you did is going to be and how you can build upon that. And the opportunity cost for what you did is leaving something to someone else. I think those are what really makes the best gateway games.
Yeah, and I'll say this for Catan. For For one, I fully agree with you where there's not a huge amount of player choices you can make in a good way. Like you can build a road, you can build a settlement, you can upgrade a settlement into a city, you can buy a development card. And that's kind of it. And so it really funnels you into how do I do these actions that I'm hoping to do. And the other thing that I think makes Catan a pretty solid gateway game is it's so social that you are talking to the people at the table, which I think is such a great aspect of board gaming. And it kind of forces you into that. And it forces you to like think about what's going on in the game and like how are you interacting with the board right now? What's Jim doing over there? What's he got going on? I think that can also create really fun moments in a game that is going poorly for you. I have so many stories of I had a game where I had a city on a thing that had a 6, an 8, and a 4, and I didn't get anything from that city all game. And isn't that silly? And isn't that unlucky? And then I had a game right afterwards where I had a settlement on the number 3, and we just kept rolling 3s the entire game, and so I just ended up with the surplus of this thing. And isn't this silly? And I have all this wheat to give you guys. And I think that because it is such a social game in that aspect, it is really good at introducing people to the fun parts of the hobby as well, where you're engaging with the other people at the table.
Well, Eric, let me ask you this. Pretend I'm a new person that you've met. You're like, oh, this guy's super cool and extraordinarily handsome. But he's never played a board game since childhood. And you are trying to get him introduced to board games. What do you want to know about me? Like, what are you going to ask me to kind of help you, one, get me interested in a game, but also select what game that you're going to kind of make your debut with?
I think theme is really important. I think that's a thing that we're at a point in modern board gaming where there are so many games at so many different difficulty level, like just how difficult is this game to understand, that we have so many different things of do you enjoy history? You got Catan, you have Splendor, you can make Splendor into like a history game. Do you like fantasy? Well then you got Clank. You have
Small World.
Like there are so many games that can do the animals. We got Harmonies. We got Cascadia. We got options. There are so many different games that can be gateway games, because there's just a lot of games that are coming out, I feel like, at this time, in this like difficulty range where it can be really in depth, or it can just be something that you're teaching to somebody who's never played board games before. And because there's so many options, I want it to be a game that the person is going to engage with. And for me, that means theme is the question that I probably would start off with. Yeah.
Well, I just had the occasion to put all of this into practice recently, because Christina has grown close with a fellow student in her course that she's taking at the university here. They were somewhat recent to Juno. She and her husband were looking to branch out into other activities. They don't really have any familiarity with board games, and Christina invited them to come to the local meetup and let's hang out. We'll play some games there. And they really weren't sure what this was going to entail. You know, they play some video games together as a couple. Like, they like to play Fortnite and they played some other things. The husband has played League of Legends in the
Mm-hmm.
past. And these are just things that we discovered through picking them up and chatting with them on the way down, which kind of helped me understand contextually like what some of their interests were. This was my first time meeting them as well. And she had, only spent time with them through the aspect of going to class together. But I brought some games in the bag. There's also some games over at the meetup that we could use from their library. But we get to Devil's Club, and when I'm bringing games out, I was thinking, all right, well, I kind of know what some of their interests are. I've asked about hobbies. So I'm not too worried about theme. But I also don't want to like overwhelm them with too many choices. And so I started with asking about like some history because we asked, do you ever play any like board games together or anything? And they were talking about like, well, we play like 10,000. I was like, dice rolling. Perfect. Okay. So do you guys, have you played Yahtzee, or do you at least kind of know what Yahtzee is? They're like, yeah, we know Yahtzee. I was like, okay, so perfect. We're going to, give King of Tokyo a shot here. Yeah. Not using powered up, just using the vanilla heroes and everything. I was like, okay, so you played Fortnite.
You call them heroes?
Combat, colorful.
These people that are destroying Tokyo, you call them heroes? This is weird.
Yeah.
Just an interesting thing I noted. It's going in your file.
Yep. And so I was like, okay, well, we're going to play this. It uses a Yahtzee mechanism to either get points or destroy all other monsters. So that makes sense. Also, Are you familiar with King of the Hill? The game that kids play, who can be standing up or on top of the hill or whatever. And whoever's on top of the hill is the king of the hill. That's the central concept of this. One person is going to try to get into and then maintain hold on Tokyo. And they're either going to try to wait out until they get enough points or make sure that no one else is able to take them down. And we're going to just do an exchange here. They picked it up immediately and loved it. From there, they played some Drawpolter, and they played, because this was actually, to me, a more obtuse game that I wouldn't normally go to as a gateway game. But because the theme was really attractive to them and the description was attractive to them, they played some Takanoko with the bamboo stacking and the panda moving everywhere. And they took to that really well again. And that's where I started thinking about, Takanoko. There are a lot of options on the board, but you're driven by simple objectives. And on your turn, you only have a couple actions that you can take, and you just select what are the two actions that you're going to do. Limited choices, immediate ramifications, and kind of smaller guided objectives that take you to completing those. And so it communicates a lot about what you're supposed to do, taking away that kind of nebulous, oh, am I looking like an idiot for choosing to do what I'm doing type of thing. And also takes away the feeling of being overwhelmed if you don't grasp 100% of the rules.
Yeah, totally. And I think that, all of those that sounds like it was a great experience introducing them to board games. And that was, I think, probably a good call to pick up on things that they are familiar with and just continue to use those reference points or touchstones as a way of helping people recognize patterns. Humans at a base level enjoy recognizing patterns. They enjoy recognizing, oh, this thing is just like this thing. That is a base level human trait when it comes to like just existing in this modern world. People like understanding things, and it's easier for them to understand things if they have a reference point of, oh, I know Yahtzee, I know King of the Hill. This is like those two things combined. That's why that is like in so many advertisements for, or maybe not even advertisements, but reviews of board games or movies or TV shows or just anything. There's a lot of, it's like if this thing and this thing had a baby. That is a way for us to say these are two reference points that are connected in this thing. So yeah, I think it sounds like King of Tokyo was a great hit for them. That would be a great. That's a great game to like introduce people.
Going back to our BGG Hall of Fame discussion, I still think King of Tokyo should be on there as like a pivotal and notable moment in game history.
I agree. Well, Richard Garfield already had his.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's hard to argue that Magic is one of the most important. But if you were to take your collection down to 20 games, I know you already trimmed it down, but if you were to take it down to 20 games that are the games that you want to keep forever, what of those games do you think would still work well as gateway games?
I'd probably keep Splendor, which I think that's a really easy gateway game. Harmonies, it would probably be in that list, and I think that's a gateway game that I find very. There's so many great things about that game as a gateway game. Of people like the cute art. It is a very beautiful looking game, which I think that can get people into it. But it also is both limited actions, but there still feels like there's a lot of space for people to make big plays in that game. And I think in that manner, it's a good gateway game because people, I feel like at the end of it, feel like they know so much more than they did at the beginning. And because it's a short enough game, that's absolutely a game that people would go, oh, I want to play that again right now. One that I think Furnace, I think would also work. One that I was going to say that I think I would probably keep in my collection and I feel like is frequently referenced as a gateway game that I think I would, in a vacuum, steer people away from would be Wingspan.
Yeah.
To me, that's a game that just, I mean, I love Wingspan, but at the same time, it feels like one step too many things to explain.
Have you seen that video of Manny Patinkin just dunking on Wingspan because his kid was trying to teach him Wingspan? And he's like, him and his wife are like, this is the most complicated game on the planet. And Elizabeth Hargrave was so excited because Inigo Montoya was dunking on her game. Yeah,
I have not seen this. This sounds awesome.
You can look up Manny Patinkin Wingspan. It's probably still on the internet somewhere. I kind of had the same feeling with Sky Team. Like, on the one hand, I think Sky Team is perfect for this because it's got a great theme. Everyone understands and can relate to planes, and also you can make it really exciting. Like if you have your friend who's like, flying a plane, that sounds exciting, you could be like, no, we're crashing a plane, like this is desperate and crazy and we're doing all these things. You can make that a little bit more intense, but there's a lot of pressure going on in every single turn of Sky Team, which you would want to make sure that someone is going to be able to feel comfortable learning a whole new skill, not just learning a game, but like learning board games as a whole. Part of what makes Sky Team so great is it's so simple, yet every single decision matters, and every decision that you make could be the wrong decision if you don't play it well that leads to your defeat. Like, it's not so high pressure that you couldn't cooperatively work together and communicate what are some good moves and that kind of stuff. But, like, that's a game that I think works amazingly well as long as it's someone that has the confidence to have a good time, even if they fail miserably.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that co-op games are really can be a good game to introduce people to board games for the sake of we're all on the same team, so either we all fail together or we all succeed together in a way that makes it kind of less competitive, which is an aspect of board games some people are turned off by. At the same time, I think that you have to just be really careful that you're not quarterbacking to the point that people can't play the game that you're there to play with them. But like, I think Pandemic, especially if the person who's teaching it is just aware that that is a thing that they need to not do, Pandemic can be a really great gateway game where you're introducing people like, oh yeah, there's diseases outbreak, we have to do these things to stop it. It might be maybe a bit too cutthroat for people who haven't played board games before. Like, I feel like if this is most of the table's first time playing a modern board game, the disease is probably going to win. Almost certainly. Yeah. It's because you just don't necessarily have the skills yet to take in the data you're receiving from the board and output that into a good formal plan. But that Forbidden Island could be another one where it's like, we're working together as a team. These are games that we can, play together, and we're going to sort our problems together. And that's a non-competitive way to introduce someone to board games.
Well, I think no matter what, it's important to know your audience, to help people feel comfortable, and to help give guidance, like whatever game that you're playing. And even if it's not someone's first game, offering suggestions on just like, hey, if you want some suggestions on some things that you could do your first couple of turns, that is perfectly helpful. And, can help with that sort of discomfort and feeling lost. Some people really want this sense of discovery. So not being overly prescriptive about what someone has to do in order to succeed, like that's quarterbacking. You generally want to steer away from that. But some people do kind of want that as a guiding hand. So as with pretty much anything social, which teaching board games to other people and introducing board games to other people is, don't be a jerk and try to know your audience and have a degree of understanding of what someone else is going through and play to the room, like see where they're at, see what they need. Don't be overly guiding, but don't be so hands off that you can see that glazed look over their eyes where like, I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
You got to adjust yourself.
What do you consider your, like, one of your gateway games, like, that got you into the hobby?
That got me into the hobby, absolutely would be Hero Quest. As a kid, and it was for kids, but that introduced me to dungeon crawling. That introduced me to systems of, persistent gameplay. And that made me understand that games could be so much more. Now, that was 1993 or something. Shortly after, I played Magic, which got me into like tabletop gaming systems, more in-depth stuff. Some other dungeon crawls like Dragon Strike I played a bunch of. And then before playing Catan, I played some board games when before I moved to Juneau here. I had some friends that were starting to get into early stuff, and they were playing a lot of Steve Jackson games. So Illuminati and Munchkin. But I think after that, I was kind of researching board games. And that's when someone was like, "Oh, you should play Catan." And I was like, I know of it, like I've seen it, I've sold it because I worked in, games stores, but I hadn't played it because that didn't necessarily kind of look like my jam. But then I ended up buying a copy, and I was like, "Oh, okay, I can see this." But I remember the exact moment when, as an adult, I was like, not just games, not just tabletop games in general, but boxed board games are my jam, is when I played Small World. I remember who I played it with. I remember the occasion of me playing it. And I had already played some other games up until that point, so I had some familiarity. But when that game hit the table, it looked like the most complicated thing I'd ever seen. But the illustrations were so inviting. The mechanical implications of what you were doing were so smart to me at the time. Like, oh, to win a battle, I just need to have 2 more tokens. I just need to be able to do that. When you die, the repercussions, like if you're defeated, you only lose 1 token. No matter how many you have there, you only lose 1 token. And then the conjunction of powers worked so well, and it just sparked my imagination. I could see what things could be possible within that play space. And it had so many cool tokens and pieces and things, and yet my turns were relatively simple. And the objective wasn't like Risk. I didn't need to wipe everyone off the board. My objective was to get as many points as I could by the end of the game. That was awesome. So Small World was the game that really convinced me, like, I want to be a part of this hobby and I want to explore all the games, because if this is what we can do, then sky's the limit. There's all kinds of things. Yeah. This is so cool.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that's a little bit of an interesting journey with starting with Hero Quest. I feel like that's a heavier game to start out with.
Have an older brother, man. But you just gotta,
and
be in that like divorced dad zone where you're spending a lot of time as latchkey kids, hanging out by yourselves in the sticks of Alaska, and you're playing a lot of Hero Quest together.
I think it also goes back to, if you're down for the theme, I think the theme can do a lot of heavy lifting to get people more into a game that might be maybe a bit more complicated, but they'll give it more runway to get going and like snag them. But like anything can be a gateway game for somebody. Like Steve's favorite games are really heavy games. Those are the games that he has interest in playing. So like I don't know what his gateway game was or is, but somebody who's that dedicated to be like, oh no, I can learn systems and how they interact. Like I want that level of play. Maybe Dune Imperium could maybe be a gateway game. Like that's one of the more complicated board games that I like really, really enjoy. And if you like Dune and Dune, you want to experience all Dune content that there is in the world, Dune Imperium can be a gateway game, because that can also be a thing where you have the touchstone of this is how the different houses are. This is vaguely what they do. So, it makes sense that the mining guild gives you
Right.
fold space.
I think one of the cardinal sins that I committed in my early content creation journey is I was talking about gateway games in another. I don't know. Was it a video? Was it an essay I published or something? But I listed War of the Ring as a game that I think could be a great showcase for the hobby because it so badly wants to emulate concepts from the Lord of the Rings, and so many people are incredibly emotionally invested in the Lord of the Rings that, like, as long as someone understands, and this is really what codified that concept that I was talking about at the beginning of the podcast, as long as someone understands, oh yeah, this is like a beastie long game where there's dice and people killing each other, and they see that and they're like, oh, that looks awesome. The thematic connotations of the things that you're going to do, I think, are going to springboard them into really diving deep into that game. And I think even though it is such a giant game, there are systems, it still has those elements of, like, it's clear there are things that you need to do. Here are smaller objectives that lead you towards bigger objectives. And, like, the ramifications of your decisions are pretty apparent as you do them. And that, again, thematic foothold is going to be a lot in getting someone past that. It's also a game that doesn't, I guess, mince words with what it's going to be, right? Like, if you have that on the table, it is not pretending to be a lighter game than it is. So if someone sees that and is still like, oh, hell yeah, this is going to be awesome, give them a shot. Give them a shot.
Yeah. We have a few listener comments that I want to bring up just because I think that they will add more to the discussion. And I think that they're just, I think that they have similar sentiments, but they phrase them in a little bit different ways that might just provoke some other thoughts. So first off, from Rabbit Victor, the comment is, I tend to introduce new players with Carcassonne, Cascadia, or some type of card game like Trio, Rebel Princess, and recently Skull King. Coup is a good choice, but personally it is a game I don't enjoy playing anymore. I'm sure theme can make a beginner enjoy a more complex game, but in my experience it did not matter too much. If the players are heavy video game players, I feel confident trying more complex games, and that has worked out well in the past. Depends on the background of the people involved.
I agree with all of that, with the exception of Coup. Unless someone had a long history of, say, poker and really like felt comfortable with bluffing mechanics. So again, it's understanding contextually what people may be comfortable with or more familiar with. But Coup has such a dependence on someone just confidently saying, well, I take 3 with my Duke. And they have no Duke in sight. They've never even seen a Duke, like, it's a game that relies on that, which I think is easily picked up. But I'm always trying to be cognizant of the person who doesn't want to look like an idiot in front of everyone else. And I don't know. I don't know that I would reach to Coup. But I think for the most part that listener is spot on.
I kind of agree with Coup. I think my issue with it is it relies on players being of similar knowledge of the game levels. Like, I think a person who has not played Coup before is going to be at such a massive disadvantage in that game from some
or
compared to somebody who has played for a while or like just played a handful of games.
They're throwing off the meta. If you have an existing group, suddenly this is a wild card that's in there. They don't even know what they're doing. Who knows what they're introducing? Yeah, like I think if someone's not afraid of losing, and they're like, yeah, like if they understand that they're probably going to lose, then I think that's fine. Because within 3 games of coup, which you could knock out in half an hour, then they're going to have the majority of what they need to have a fighting chance,
Yeah. In a similar way, and this is a game that I do think makes for a good gateway game, just because of how, in my mind, like, the cards tell you what they do, would be Love Letter. I think that's another game that Rabbit Victor didn't necessarily mention, but I do think that would be a one that fits the general vibe of games that he recommended, which is just, this is a lighter game. The cards themselves, there's less bluffing involved, so people might be more confident in just being a little bit more like, oh, how does this card work? Like, I just don't know, what does this do? And that is another game that I feel like definitely rewards a person who has played at least once or twice before. But because the rounds are so quick, and then the game is just like a handful of rounds, you can easily go like, oh, okay, I understand how this all works now.
Same thing's true with Skull or any number of those games, but I think that same disadvantage would be there for anyone who is playing it for the first time. Even if they've played hundreds of games in the past, you're picking up what is the unique cadence and leeway that you have to kind of bluff your way around that game. Hit me with your next one. What's the next comment?
The second comment is from Gigas News. And it says,
love it.
Depends so much on the person/group. I love figuring out a great game for a group of casual gamers. Some aspects I'll think about. Great art. It will often make people like the game before we've even started. I also think it contributes greatly to the experience, and it's often so much nicer than what people are used to from the old classics they know. Theme, obviously. What kind of stuff will this group like? Analysis paralysis potential. Some new players are surprisingly prone to it, and too many people, it doesn't even occur to think about what to do before it's their turn. And I don't like to be the person that constantly tells them to start thinking about their turn early. Complexity. Is this group already familiar with, for example, turn-based video games? Is it a group of people who work in tech and might be into something a bit more crunchy? I think this brings up a lot of great points. I think art is a really good selling point. Like, people are, I think, much more forgiving if they're like, oh, this looks really cool. This is fun to look at, even if I don't quite get the rules just yet. And then analysis paralysis potential, that is very true. I think because people are, I think this loops back to what you've said previously, which is people are scared to look silly and look like they've made a mistake. People who are new to the hobby, who aren't as used to losing, or like, I'm going to test this out, I'm going to mess around and find out, are very prone to not being able to make a decision in a short time span.
Mm-hmm. And I think that again comes back to a good gateway game is something that you can see the ramifications of your actions fairly quickly, and there's a limited number of choices. I'm not saying it has to be 3. It doesn't have to be Abyss, even though I use that as a solid example. But like where the impact of your decision is the opportunity cost is a great example, because you want to do all the things in your turn, there's only 4 or 5 different things that you can do. And by taking something, you're giving up access to another because someone else is going to hop onto that. That gives you a good understanding of consequences. And then, like someone doesn't have to know rules for 15 different things. They just need to know what the handful of things that they can do on this turn are going to be. And, like our listeners are really hitting on it. As we've talked about, know your audience, learn a little bit more about them, try to get a little bit of context before you say, well, this is the game for you.
Yeah, totally. And then this is not a listener question, but this is my final question for you that just to kind of wrap it up. If you had to choose in a vacuum one game that would serve as the gateway game for all people joining the hobby for forever, what game would you choose?
Oh my God. Oh boy.
Has to be as universal as possible gateway game.
I mean, right off the top of my head, I'm thinking Harmonies, because it has such vibrant, beautiful illustrations. It has a simpler mode, a slightly more complex, more difficult mode in the water side, and then the additive ability to add the spirits to it. It has really tactile components, and again, you're making very small choices, but they are impactful and consequential. Though my instinct, as you were saying the question, was Century Spice Road, because that is so distilled, like even more than Splendor in my mind. Like the number of things that you can do is so small, and the thing that you can accuse Century of is being like overly polished, overly bland, like it is maybe too distilled, but it works so well at showing exchange, the expansion of capabilities, and wordlessly guiding you towards objectives, that I think anyone could learn it, but it has a significant amount of things going on under the hood that make it a satisfying game.
I mean, I think both those would be great choices. Harmony's definitely. I think at this exact moment I would be hesitant just because I feel like a ton of recency bias with it, but like my
exactly
mom
that's
is super into it, and she's like a person who I don't necessarily think of as a person who is very into board games, but like I think that's a great entry point for her. It's a game that also I think rewards playing more, which I feel like can then get people into the hobby if they are now like, oh, I play this game. Oh, I can try another game, but I know how this works. But yeah, I guess my one concern with it is just it's so recent. I don't know how it's going to hold up. Like I think that it clearly is a very solid game, especially in this realm of like this specific space in board games. I think
the
oh, go ahead.
go ahead.
No, you go.
No. Okay, sir. To stick with the Bruno Catala thing, I think King Domino is an incredible design. It relies on the kind of cultural connotations of dominoes. You're building an expansive empire. You can quickly see what the complications are, and like when you start making bad decisions, you could see the noose kind of pulling. It's vibrant. The illustrations have a lot of nuance on them. You could be like, oh, this one has a cool dragon shadow on it. And the choices are very simple but very meaningful. And there's a reason why it was such a hit. It is something that I only break out with more casual gamers or newer gamers at this point. You know, like if that is the level of complexity that people don't want to go beyond, then I love playing it. Admittedly, I don't break it out all the time when I'm playing with my wife or other friends who are coming over, but I do keep it in my collection because I like that game quite a bit, and I think that it's an incredible ambassador for the hobby.
Yeah. I think I'm torn between Sushi Go, which we've talked about. I think that just is a game that is easy to understand. It's easy to like teach and pick up and play, but it also teaches so many fundamental board game concepts of like tableau building, set collection, the picking one card, that this is going to be your card, and you have to make a choice between these 7 cards to start out with. And it also just is, it's really cute. The artwork is there. And I think that because it is simultaneous play, it just is like a really fast game to play through a few different rounds. And I'm between Sushi Go and Flamme Rouge. I think Flamme Rouge, the reason that I think it's a really universal game is it is so visually clear what's happening, where it's, oh, this person's really far ahead. We're catching up to them. They're getting exhaustion cards. I think that it teaches a lot of concepts in board games like deck management. It makes you really interact with the players around you, where you're like, oh, how far do I think Eric's going to go this round? Because I'm drafting behind him and I don't want to get ahead of him. I think that's a game that I feel is just, it has amazing table presence where you build out your track, and bikes are a pretty solid, like bikes and racing are a pretty solid reference point for people, where I feel like it's a theme that isn't off-putting while at the same time being like pretty captivating for people who are just vaguely aware of what's going on.
It's both elegant and has kind of a toy element building out the track. And as much as I love Heat, which is essentially the same system and an evolution of the concept, Heat is exactly what you don't want in onboarding someone, I think, because that sequence of play requires you to do things that can easily be forgotten. And when someone is feeling vulnerable and learning a brand new thing, and you as an experienced player forget something and go like, oh, right, I forgot to do that, blah, 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 that makes their confidence drop even further. And that's not always the best. I have seen so many experienced gamers play Heat and then go like, oh, right, forgot that. Okay, so back up just a little bit and do this. It is a fabulous game. I love Heat, but I totally agree that I think Flamme Rouge would be the better introduction to the hobby.
Yeah. I think that there's a ton of games that can be great gateway games, and I think that we're at a time where it's the golden age of gateway games. I think there are a lot of people who are looking to make games that are in this ballpark in terms of difficulty, but also kind of fun and approachable in a way that I think now's a great time to be figuring out what gateway games you want to make sure are in your collection.
Yeah, and I shouted out Bruno Catala, but Phil Walker Harding, who did Sushi Go, has really explored this realm fantastically with Emotep is a great example, or Emotep Duel. And then Gizmos is another fantastic example of games with few options, really meaningful decisions, and still feels good. Like, as an experienced gamer, you're still like, yeah, I'm doing cool things in this game.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that there are so many games that we didn't necessarily touch on. And I think that you and I would both love to hear what people think of as their like gateway game. Like when you think about it, what's the game that comes to mind? Feel free to comment on whatever platform you are on. If you have any questions related to gateway games or whatever our topic is going to be next week, we'll post about that on our YouTube channel, so keep an eye out for that. But any comments you have, post them on the platform you are consuming this podcast, or feel free to email us at cardboardherald@gmail.com. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for being an awesome community. I am Eric with the Cardboard Herald, along here with Jack.
That's me. Later.